Hi, everyone. I've got a fantastic interview. I always say that, but I really have a fantastic interview and fantastic interviewee. I should declare an interest. He's related to me. He's my cousin. But that aside, his career started off at, in the Treasury. And that took him to Europe and all the rest of it. And then there's Goldman Sachs thrown in there and there's Swift thrown in there as well. So I want to introduce you all to Vikesh Patel. Vikesh, welcome on board. I want to take you right back before I discuss secrets of success and how do you get into finance, and then for people who are in middle to senior management and senior management such as yourself, how do you progress up that ladder and so on. I want to take you all the way back to King's College London, and if I'm not mistaken, you got a first in maths and you got a distinction in your masters. Is that right?
Yes.
See, I remember, because I remember thinking, bloody hell, and we're related? How come that didn't brush off on me? So let's go back to studies in university. And there's a lot of the audience. I've got an audience here who's going to be everybody from their 60s right down to 18-year-olds. How did you do so well at university?
Yeah, well, look, thank you very much. And it's a real pleasure to be here. I think when I look back at that period, but also just generally, some good advice I got from a teacher at school was just do stuff you enjoy. And if you follow your passion, it becomes less of a job and less of a slog and less of a kind of arduous process. And I had some good teachers that kind of got me passionate in that. And I just kind of had a, hopefully still am today, a bit curious about kind of what's happening and what's going on. And university was just a great exploration and a chance to kind of, have fun, explore, learn stuff, grow. And so, yeah, the kind of, I didn't go into it thinking, right, I need to do this to get there. It was very much, what do I enjoy? And just play to that a bit.
And that's fantastic advice. And I think it's often underestimated by people how important that is, that it just gives you that edge when you enjoy it. And I mean, most people will say, you enjoyed maths that much? But clearly you did. Now that took you then to the Treasury, Her Majesty's Treasury.
Yeah.
How was that? How's working in government? Would you recommend it as a career? What do you think about working as in the civil service? And would you think it more of a stepping stone? And also, how do you break into it for our audience? How do you break into it?
Yeah, I mean, I loved my time in the civil service. And, it is one of those periods where I came out of university. You get a fantastic exposure to a range of different skills. One day you could be writing a policy paper that would be going to your boss, who would then end up with a minister. The other day you could be doing a more medium-term project that's looking at trends, analysis, and what that may mean in terms of public spending or kind of fiscal policy, or if you're in another department, your policy domain. So it's deeply rewarding. It's there. You can see the impact straight away. It's a fantastic kind of grounding in just being able to write well, to communicate well, to analyze data well. And how did I get in? Well, I was kind of fascinated with the budget, right? As being nerdy as I am, probably as nerdy as you are, actually, in many respects.
No. You get the prize on.
Yeah.
I haven't got a distinction in a master's in maths, mate.
Yeah, well, yeah, we'll debate that another time. But I used to love watching the budget. I used to love watching the theatre of it. I used to love the kind of red box and all of that, and kind of seeing kind of what it was around. And so the opportunity came up to do a kind of summer internship with the Treasury, looking at the health review. So at the time, the Treasury had commissioned Derek Wanless to look at how much they would spend. And I was doing some number crunching and data analysis. And after that, they asked me to kind of, would I be interested in joining full time after I finished? Yeah, did some testing that you need to do, as most organizations do. And kind of was offered the role, and kind of never really looked back. I mean, some of the best years I've had, and kind of still look back and use a lot of the learning that I got there.
So you'd recommend it as for you as a stepping stone before you went to the private sector, for the training and the skills. You'd recommend it as a career to look at.
Yeah, I would. I mean, I still have many close friends who are very successful and still in the civil service. I think my stepping stone into the private sector came, I'm sure we'll touch on it in a minute, but as a career, whether you want to have longevity there's tons of opportunities to rotate between departments, to move into different areas, to have postings abroad if you so choose. So it's a really, really good career. And for those who kind of, want to pursue other things, I think, the civil service do also encourage secondments into the private sector with a view that people can get some experience and come back and actually, bring that into their day-to-day work. So there's lots of different paths that you can kind of hop in and out of.
Fantastic. And one of the things that we're keen to promote, obviously there's a lack of ethnic diversity in the civil service, and the civil service are keen to promote it. I work in government. I know they're still pushing at it, and it was great. When you were there, what was that, 20 years ago now?
18 years? Exactly, 2002.
So you would have been a sort of a bit of a flag bearer at the time. Now tell me what happened after the civil service. Where did you go next?
So I joined Morgan Stanley. And the reason I joined Morgan Stanley, I was involved in a couple of policy areas that were linked to the financial markets. And for those who follow that closely, we were looking really at the time when the UK was in Europe, and we were looking at the Financial Services Action Plan. So a set of 41 directives, really looking at harmonizing financial services, that led to MiFID and the capital kind of adequacy rules and the Market Abuse Directive and various others. So I was kind of involved in that and looking at that from within the Treasury with others. And naturally, one of the things we were doing was talking to banks and, getting their feedback on what would the implications be of certain policy decisions. And Morgan Stanley were one of a number of banks who kind of, were part of a group who were giving us some advice on market impact. And they asked me if I'd kind of go and join their government relations team, look at helping them figure out and look at their regulatory footprint in Europe. So that was my stepping stone into Morgan Stanley. And I did that role for a couple of years. And I kind of felt that actually I'm in a bank and I'm doing policy work in a bank, which is valuable, and I was learning, but actually should probably learn what a bank does. And so kind of, with support from people internally, went in and looked at worked in a strategy team looking at our kind of post-trade strategy. So what were we doing after trade execution with clearing of trades, with the settlement of trades? How efficient could we make it? Where should we be looking at industry consortiums? And that really got me into the heart of how the bank was kind of operating and looking and working. So 2 steps there, one, a relatively comfortable one, so public sector to private sector, and then one that was kind of supported by those internally to kind of say, well, we'll support you to kind of look at kind of, these areas.
And that sort of interface between government and the corporate world, that seems to be increasing. We think of people like Nick Clegg moving from being Deputy Prime Minister to having that government liaison role at Facebook and on gazillions, far more than he would have earned in government, of course.
Well, indeed.
And it opens up doors, and it's often a route people don't think about, which is, the route you've taken, which is civil service, get phenomenal training, and then be even more attractive to the private sector because you're used to dealing with government, and the government can, obviously, it's a very important partner to have. So you had all that skill, you had all that knowledge, and then you had the best of both worlds, because then you got the Morgan Stanley stuff. What came after that? And also, what put you in a position, other than being good at what you do, what put you in a position to get noticed, to get promoted? What advice would you give people if you were saying, here are my top tips of what you should do to move up as you've done?
Yeah. And I think, the first part you said, I think it has always been an important role, how private sector companies enact their business objectives, which inevitably will touch on governments and regulation and taxation and various other things. And if you can navigate that and you can bring some structure to that and you have a network, it's a highly commoditized skill set. And that's almost a segue into the second part of your question. In those years when I was working, for me, it was a few things that I would do. And actually, they're still kind of core non-negotiables for me in my career now. But it was really networking and kind of, and that doesn't mean necessarily kind of doing kind of, always being at the drinks or all of that, but networking in the sense of taking a bit of time to know who are my stakeholders, who are the ones who I need to do business with and can help me deliver my objectives, who are those who I can learn from and help give me advice and guidance, and who are those that, I need to keep in touch with. And to do that with a bit of a purpose and a bit of a kind of, yes, there's a plan, but you work your network in that side. And that's what I still do. I always try and identify my stakeholders straight away. The other things that I still lean on, and a lot of it comes from, my faith in Hinduism, right? Hard work, discipline, right? Commitment, being kind, always looking for an opportunity that's positive necessarily than the setback. And that can be hard, right? It's not always roses, but those things I learn, and I'm, from when I kind of look at our religion and my faith, and it's a way that I kind of move forward. Those are still non-negotiables I look at today, right? You ask me kind of what I do now with my leadership team today. We went through an exercise a couple of months ago where we went through and said, well, what are our team non-negotiables? And we came out with 3: consistency, be helpful, and kindness. Now, these aren't culture. The company has its culture. These are our values almost. These are maybe before culture. How do we want to work? How do we want to be seen? And my experience is that's done me well. Things move in a certain way, opportunities are there, and you take them and you show through that hard work that you are where you need to be.
Well, I'm glad you brought faith into it, because you're on our advisory board, and thank you for City Hindus Network, which is people who happen to be Hindu and also involved in the city. And I think you've explained it incredibly well, how to put faith and the city or finance together in terms of personal views. You've also explained how you've done that as a leader within your profession. Now, getting to that stage of leadership that you're in now, you're very senior at Swift. Take me from Morgan Stanley to Swift, and what were the decision-making processes? And again, what would be your advice to people who now, are a bit more senior and are looking at those more senior jumps up, the ones that you made in the more recent parts of your career?
Yeah, and I think, so, from Morgan Stanley, there was a couple of stops along the way. I did some time at Goldman Sachs, doing a similar role to Morgan Stanley on strategy, but globally. And then I did a stint at the London Stock Exchange, where I worked for London Clearing House. I was a COO for Pan-European equity and repo clearing. And the move from there to Swift was very much a couple of things. One was I was looking for a role, not actively, but a role came up, and it was with Swift. Now, Swift is a community-owned organization, and I really felt actually I wanted to give something back, and the ethos of the company was very much in line with kind of, where I was, serving the good of the market, really led by the community and trying to do good and bring scalable solutions to the market. In leadership terms, I think what I try and do, and what's served me well, is really to think about being of service, right? And, I know there are, as you just mentioned, there are some, there'll be people listening who are Hindus here. The religion talks about service in everything it does. And service can mean doing the right thing for my team, helping my boss, thinking about courage, and putting my voice out when I think actually that doesn't feel right, or really going and supporting a decision once it's been made. For those who aren't necessarily of Hindu faith, the military, Sandhurst, for example, their motto is serve to lead, right? And it's there in terms of military leadership as well. This concept that if you think outside of self, you look for the good for either your client, your community, your, whatever it may be, and you try and do the next right thing. That has been for me the single biggest thing that stood the test of leadership time, right? You can be very, you can move with decisions in front of you, And those can, if they're isolated decisions, be right or wrong. Whereas actually, if you're moving with a purpose, moving with a set of values, and trying to be of service, that for me is kind of what I always rely and fall back on.
Yeah, and put another way, it could be being of value. Often in secular terms, it's put as just be valuable. See, very often people focus on qualifications and, getting, ticking the boxes of the certificate. How much more important would you say the softer skills are? Obviously, it's not an either or. Now, you've mentioned the softer skills of being of service, being of value. Which are the other ones you would advise the people watching this who are not as high up in their career as you are, that they really should work on? Which are the ones which you'd say, you know what, these are really right up there that you need to, beyond value and service, that you need to focus on?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So what I would say is, I got a piece of advice early on in my career, which was, play to your strengths and know the areas that you need help and that aren't your strengths. So be self-reflective. So if you're analytical, you're going to be going at it with that mindset. You'll have natural strengths, whether it's analysis, whether it's kind of, seeing problems, and you'll see your skill set develop around that, and you need to sharpen that. If another area is something that or you've had feedback that actually doesn't have to be a development area or a problem, but you're not as strong at, well, I think it's okay to acknowledge that you're not okay with that and that you can try and sharpen that as you need. But there's diminishing returns on that. So actually, for me, it was kind of, how do I use people around me to help me grow there and to help augment kind of a gap I may have? And what do I bring to them in terms of analysis or being able to see a problem or being able to write? And then how do I move forward? I think we can get too hung up with, right, you're either good at something or bad at something. Well, the analysis is important, but what you do with that analysis is even more important, right? You don't need to be hung up that, right, I'm never going to be able to speak on a panel. Well, sure, you can get trained to do that, but if genuinely you don't want to do that, that's not the end of your career. There are other ways to pivot. And actually the key word there is career. It's over many years, right? You don't look at it year on year, even though we get measured annually. We should look at it kind of more than that.
And speaking of career and those gaps that people might have, you mentioned networking earlier in terms of getting noticed. There's a lot of people out there working incredibly hard and they're saying, you know what, I'm just not getting noticed. Social media, where does that come in? What's your take on sort of being present on social media in order to display your credentials or whatever else? Do you think it matters? Is it not important? What if you don't like doing it? There's a lot of people out there saying, look, I don't want to be on LinkedIn. I don't want to be anywhere. What would your advice be in broad terms for people there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think, inevitably social media continues to be a growth medium to get your personal profile out, as well as your company profile, as well as kind of different things that you need to kind of, get out into the market and into customers. So I think it's always going to be there. My advice is, what I try and do is find a topic that I know and make my posts and my content strong around that topic. So I have credibility on the topic, I have a level of depth on the topic, and actually the reverse of the networking, people then will come to me or the company and say, it would be great to have Vikesh on here, because they've seen the depth of one or two areas that I tend to kind of talk about. I think if you go too broad, too superficial, there can be risks at that, right? Actually, what are you getting in return? What does that mean for your personal brand? What does that mean for the expertise you want to put out there, and how you can move things forward?
We're going to be short on time. I know you've got trillions of dollars and other currencies to move around the world. So I'm going to finish off with a couple of questions all wrapped into one. Sort of desert island disc type of thing.
All right.
Any books that you recommend whilst you think about that? Just touch upon, if you could, how you balance. You've got a lovely wife. I'm very fond of your wife. You've got two lovely kids. How did you manage all of that within your career, as well as you were sort of, as I say, moving up the ladder?
Yeah. So the book So I would recommend The 5 a.m. Club by Robin Sharma.
Okay.
Read it probably about a year ago. It's set as a fable, but really the framework is built into that, where he talks about the power hour of 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. And there's a framework within there. I'm not going to spoil the story. Sounds scary. There is a 66-day habit formation thing that people need to go through. But once you get through the, oh my God, what am I doing phase, it is pretty cool. So that's the book I'd recommend. Balance is an interesting one. I think for me, balance is around two things: taking the opportunities when they come up, and using technology. Now, what do I mean by that? There will be opportunities where, before this interview, and we were talking, my daughter did something downstairs on a wall that involves some soap. Now, if I'm all present, that can be a great moment. It can be a stressful moment, but still a great moment. When I'm working, I try and stay present and be present in that. And technology, video calling on your mobile, being accessible somewhere else, makes it a lot more acceptable. And the pandemic has amplified that we will be working in different locations in different ways. So for me, it's use technology and be all you can be in the moments you have.
Vikesh, we could talk for hours. We will talk for hours because you're going to be at my birthday party later in the year.
Yeah.
That's a whole separate issue. Okay. And everybody on this video is not invited to that. It's select few, such as your good self. Thank you again for being on the CHN advisory board. Thank you for doing this. Like I said, I know there's a million other things. There'll be lots and lots of questions that the audience will have. Hopefully they'll put it into the various social media comment sections and we'll be able to answer them going forward ad hoc. But for the moment, I know your employer calls and the world calls in terms of, that money's not going to go around sloshing around the world by itself. So I'm going to let you get back to Swift, and thank you once again for
agreeing
to do this.